My name is Evelyn Monroe. I don't remember giving birth to my daughter, but the DNA doesn't lie. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It arrived in an envelope I hadn't asked for. I almost threw it out, another thick government-branded envelope with a barcoded sticker and no return name. I figured it was insurance paperwork, or some overdue update from a medical board I hadn't worked with in years. But something about it felt heavier, like it carried more than just paper. I opened it with a knife I kept in the drawer, the same one I used to open birthday cards from clients I'd long since stopped editing for. Inside was a letter and a test result printed on thin, unforgiving stock. Your DNA match has been confirmed with a high probability parent-child relationship to Rachel Monroe. I froze. My body didn't move, but something deep in my chest started vibrating. Rachel Monroe. I didn't know a Rachel Monroe. I reread the document, blinking. Then I read it again. It was real. The signatures, the lab codes, the match rating. 99.99978%. Biological mother. Me. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the document until the sunlight shifted across the tiles. My first thought wasn't how it was who put her up to this. The name didn't sound familiar. And it wasn't a scam. I know scams. This was official. Government-funded health database testing. A match program that I had voluntarily opted into a decade ago, thinking it might help with medical family history if I ever needed it. Apparently, someone else had opted in too. Rachel Monroe. A stranger. Or not. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch instead of my bed like I used to do when my ex-husband left, and the sheets still smelled like him. The air in the house felt sharp, like it had grown teeth. At 2:37 a.m., I Googled her name. Nothing unusual. Rachel Monroe, 30 years old, lives in Sacramento, works as an oncology nurse, private social media. But then I found a photo on LinkedIn, professional, stiff smiling, too wide. My stomach twisted, because I knew that smile. I had seen it in the mirror. I wanted to pretend it was a mistake, that someone had mixed up samples, that the name was similar, that this was some stranger who just shared a few alleles. But I'm a medical editor. I know how DNA tests work. I know what 99.99978% means. I just didn't know how it could be true. Because I have never had a daughter. I had a daughter. But she didn't live. It happened 29 years ago. I was 23, newly married, fresh out of nursing school, pregnant and scared and naive. They told me I was lucky. Easy pregnancy, minimal complications. But during labor, something went wrong. I remember the pain, that deep splitting ache, and then a blur. A nurse whispering to someone else. My husband crying quietly into his hands. The doctor with that particular brand of forced calm that says everything is broken and we don't know how to tell you. They said she didn't breathe. They said she was stillborn. They took her away before I ever saw her. They gave me drugs to sleep, to grieve, to move on. And I did. Or I thought I did. Until today. I sat in my backyard the next morning with the letter on my lap and my hands shaking like they hadn't in years. I used to have such steady hands in nursing, editing, chopping vegetables, I never trembled. But now I couldn't hold a mug. I called the number on the paper. A hotline for matches. The woman on the other end had a warm voice, the kind designed to calm people like me. She confirmed it. Rachel Monroe had submitted her DNA as part of her medical background search. No adoption paperwork had been attached. She was from all records born to unknown parents and raised by adoptive guardians in the Bay Area. I asked her to repeat that, twice. Born to unknown parents. Not officially listed. No trace back to me. And yet, the match said otherwise. I hung up. And then the email came. Subject line, "Hello from Rachel Monroe. I think I'm your daughter." I didn't open it right away. I stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. I paced the kitchen. I washed dishes that were already clean. I stared at a water stain on the ceiling I'd been meaning to paint for months. And then, after what felt like hours, I clicked. "Hi, Evelyn. I hope this doesn't scare you. I'm writing because we were matched in a national DNA registry. I've been looking for my biological parents for a long time, not out of resentment, just curiosity. You're the first real match I've ever had. I don't want to intrude, but if you're open to talking, I'd be grateful. Best Rachel. There were no accusations, no drama. Just a girl, a woman reaching out through the dark, hoping someone would answer. But I didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next one either. Because all I could think was, I don't remember giving birth to her. And yet her smile looked like mine. I didn't respond to Rachel's email for 3 days. I read it 26 times. I drafted replies, kind ones, cautious ones, even versions that were cold and dismissive. I deleted them all. I kept telling myself that silence was safer, that opening the door to this girl, this mystery, would only unleash more questions. But the truth is, I was afraid. Not of Rachel, of myself, of what I might remember, or, worse, what I might not. On the 4th day, she wrote again. Hi again, I just wanted to follow up. I understand if you don't want to talk, but I'll leave my number here in case you change your mind. I really hope you're okay. Rachel. No pressure, no guilt, just a door left slightly open, and something in me, something maternal instinctual perhaps, reached for the handle. I called. She answered on the 2nd ring. Hello! Her voice was soft, warm, younger than I expected. I cleared my throat. Rachel. Yes, it's Evelyn Monroe. Silence. Then, oh my God, I didn't think you'd call. I wasn't sure either. A nervous laugh on the other end. This is surreal. Yes, I said, it is. Another pause. Then she said gently, do you want to talk? So I said the only thing I could, maybe coffee? We met at a small cafe halfway between our city's neutral ground. I picked it because it was quiet, unremarkable. I didn't want noise. I didn't want witnesses to whatever I might feel. I arrived early, ordered tea I wouldn't drink, sat in a corner booth facing the door. She arrived 6 minutes late, and when she walked in, I forgot how to breathe. Because there standing in front of me was my own face 25 years younger. The same jawline, the same eyes, the same tiny scar on the eyebrow, the one I got when I fell off my bike at 12. My whole world tilted. Hi, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I stared. She fidgeted. Sorry. This is weird, right? I nodded. It's something. She smiled. You look exactly like the photo I found, but older. I mean, not in a bad way. Just, you look like me, I blurted out. She laughed, relieved. I was hoping you'd say that. And then we both laughed, two strangers with matching DNA trying to find footing on a floor that had just turned to water. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She told me about her life, raised in San Rafael, adopted at 3 weeks old. Her parents were loving, kind, traditional. She always knew she was adopted, but they didn't have many details. They were told the birth was quiet, arranged through a private channel, and that her biological mother wanted privacy. But I never blamed you, she said quickly. I always figured it was complicated. It was. I said, though, I wasn't sure if I was lying. I told her I'd only had one pregnancy, that the baby didn't survive. Her smile faltered. Then maybe the hospital lied to both of us. I didn't know what to say. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. A little girl in a sun hat standing in front of a fountain. That's me at 3, she said. I don't know who took the photo, but look. She pointed to the background. A woman blurry out of focus standing on the far edge of the image. It was a stretch, but I saw it. The same shape of my face. The same hairline. Where was this taken, I asked. A hospital garden, she said. UC Med Center. Same hospital you listed on your DNA profile. The room spun. That hospital, it was where I gave birth. Where they told me I lost her. We sat in silence for a long time. Then Rachel said quietly, do you think it's possible they took you off sedation and handed me over, but you were too out of it to remember? I swallowed. I don't know. You didn't hold me? I don't remember. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did. They softened like she understood. And that's when I felt it, the first real ache. Not guilt, not shame, longing. When we finally said goodbye, she hugged me, without hesitation. She smelled like eucalyptus and vanilla, a scent so familiar I couldn't place it. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was blood. I didn't cry. But as I drove home, I kept touching my shoulder where her cheek had rested for 1 second longer than necessary. That night, I dug through my files. Old records, tax returns, medical forms, hospital bills. I found the discharge summary from the night of my delivery. It was thin. Too thin. No post-delivery notes. No autopsy records. Just a generic line: patient released in stable condition. No mention of the baby. No stillbirth listed. Just silence. I sat there for hours reading it over and over, and then I whispered out loud to no one, "What did they do with you?" They told me she was stillborn. I remember the doctor's voice, measured, hushed, almost embarrassed by the weight of his own words. "We did everything we could, Mrs. Monroe. I'm so sorry." Then came the sedatives. Then came the silence. I never held her. I never saw her. I just accepted it. Because I was 23. Because I was grieving. Because I trusted them. But now, I don't know what I lost that night. Or who I lost. That evening, I pulled an old journal from the back of my closet. It was floral padded, the kind you'd buy at a grocery store. I had written in it every day during my pregnancy, tracking cravings, mood swings, baby names. January 9th, I think I felt her kick. February 3rd, we're naming her Charlotte. Charlie for short. March 17th, contractions started. We're going to the hospital. Then nothing. No entry for the 18th. No entry ever again. Just a blank page, followed by the rest of my life. My ex-husband Jonah never talked much about what happened. He'd been by my side during the delivery, or so they told me. I had foggy memories of his hand on mine, of his face distorted by tears. But the details were smudged like a dream that fades the moment you open your eyes. We divorced 6 years later. No children, no healing, just a slow unraveling. I never asked him about that night. Not until now. I called him the next day. He sounded older, gravel in his voice, slower speech. I hadn't spoken to him in years. "Evelyn," he said, "is everything okay?" "No," I said. "I need to ask you something about the baby." A long pause. "You mean Charlotte?" "Yes." He cleared his throat. "I didn't think I'd ever hear you say her name again." "I got a DNA result," I said. "A woman. She might be our daughter." Another silence. Longer this time. "I knew something was off," he said quietly. "That night." "What do you mean?" "They sedated you early. You were unconscious before the delivery even began. They told me it was for your safety, but I didn't like the way they spoke. The way they rushed me out after." My heart clenched. "You saw her?" I asked. "No. That's the thing. I never saw her. They said you were too weak, that there were complications. And then they told me she didn't make it." "Did you ever question it?" "All the time. But they handed me a death certificate and told me to move on." I asked him if he kept it. He said no, he burned it after our divorce during what he called his rage years. "I didn't want any reminders," he said. "But Evelyn, I always thought, I don't know, that something darker happened." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you were barely breathing. You wouldn't even look at me. I thought if I pushed, I'd lose you too." I thanked him. Then I hung up. And then I cried. For the first time in years. Not polite crying, not a few tears and a tissue. I sobbed. Because my body had been pregnant, had gone through labor, had torn and bled and suffered. And maybe, just maybe, it had loved, and someone had taken that from me. I made an appointment to go back to UC Medical Center. I told them I wanted to request archived medical files from 1996. They gave me a form, then another, then another. They said old records from that era were digitally inconsistent. Some had been lost, some stored off-site, some not retrievable without court order. I tried to stay calm. I tried to smile. But I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the nurse by the collar and say, "I think someone stole my baby. Does that mean anything to you?" Instead, I thanked her and walked out. In the parking lot, I called Rachel. I hadn't spoken to her since our coffee. She picked up immediately. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "I'm going back into my past," I replied. And it's darker than I thought. There was a pause. Want some company, she asked. I hesitated. But something in her voice, her steadiness, her grace, made me say yes. She met me at my house that evening. She brought cookies, cheap store-bought ones. It made me laugh. I figured it's what daughters do, she said. We sat on my back porch, the sun low, the sky painted in copper and lavender. I talked to Jonah, I said. He never saw the body either. Rachel swallowed hard. That's horrifying. I think they lied to us both. Why? I shook my head. I don't know. Maybe someone wanted a baby. Maybe someone thought I wouldn't be fit. Maybe it was money. Or maybe it was just a system that let women like me disappear. Rachel touched my hand. Do you want to find the truth? And for the first time I said, yes. We started with the hospital records. Rachel and I went together. She brought a notepad. I brought a folder of every document I had ever kept from that time, discharge papers, prescriptions, even a faded appointment card for my 6-week prenatal checkup. UC Medical Center had changed. The walls were brighter, newer. The wing where I gave birth had been converted into a surgical unit. There was no nursery anymore, just silence and automatic doors. The woman at records was kind, but distracted the way people are when they're used to being ignored. We're looking for a delivery file from 1996, I said. She typed. What's the patient's name? Evelyn Monroe, March 17th, 1996. A pause. She typed again. We'll need to make a formal request. That file isn't digital, it's stored off-site. Can I get it today? A look of practiced sympathy. No, ma'am, it can take up to 30 days. We sat in the lobby for an hour afterward. Neither of us wanted to leave. I'm not sure they ever digitized my chart, I said. The discharge summary I have is vague, like a ghost of the real file. Rachel was quiet for a while, then said, I've been through this. My adoptive mom tried to find my original birth certificate once. There were pages missing. One entry was handwritten and then crossed out. Did they ever tell you who handled the adoption? No, they said it was closed. Private. Agency? They said the hospital arranged it. That word again. Hospital. Not a lawyer. Not a state official. The hospital. Rachel had an idea. My best friend's mom used to work here, she said. She was a records clerk. Retired 2 years ago. I can call her. She stepped outside to make the call, while I sat still absorbing the fluorescent hum of the lobby. She came back in 15 minutes later. She said she remembers your name. My heart flipped. What? She was a junior clerk back then. She didn't process births directly, but she said she remembers something about a Monroe file because the doctor marked it confidential. It got flagged as internal only. Internal only, I repeated. What does that mean? She said only department heads or legal staff could access it. But I was a patient. She said, that was unusual. We left the hospital. We didn't talk much in the car. I dropped Rachel off at a train station and drove home in silence, the word confidential pounding like a metronome in my skull. When I got home, I went to my office, not the room where I edit manuscripts, but the smaller one down the hall, where I kept boxes from the past I couldn't let go of. I dug until I found it, a yellowed envelope crinkled from too many moves. Inside was the bill for my hospital stay. Room charge, meds, recovery. No delivery fee. No charge for labor. No OB supervision fee. No infant care. Nothing. The next morning, I called a woman I used to work with, Gloria Phelps. She was a midwife when I was a nurse. Now she was retired, but we kept in touch. She still used the same landline she had in the 90s, and her voice hadn't changed a bit. Gloria, I said after the hellos. Do you remember my delivery, 1996? March. She was quiet for a moment. Then I remember you were scheduled. I wasn't there that night. But I remember what people said afterward. What did they say? That it was hushed. That the records disappeared. Disappeared. Evelyn, sometimes hospitals cover their mistakes, especially in that era. They'd write things off as clerical errors. A baby missing a mother confused, they'd call it trauma, not truth. Was it a mistake? I asked, my throat tightening. Or was it deliberate? She didn't answer right away. Then softly, I think someone wanted that baby gone. I told Rachel everything. We were sitting in my living room surrounded by old folders, files, legal pads. We had turned my quiet suburban home into a crime scene of paper. She stared at me for a long time, then said, "So you think I was stolen?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think I was kept in the dark." Rachel nodded slowly. "Then we find the light." She brought over an ancestry kit the next day, not for herself, but for me. "Let's do this together," she said. "We match already, but if we run both profiles through the ancestry tree, we might find relatives. Maybe even someone who knows what happened." I hesitated. "Are you ready to know the whole truth?" I asked her. Her eyes were steady. "I think I've always known I didn't come from where I was told I did. But you're the first thing that's ever felt real." That did it. We swabbed, we mailed, we waited. That night, as she was leaving, she stood in the doorway for a long time. "You know," she said softly, "I never asked for this." "I know, but now I'm glad I found you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I don't remember giving birth to you," I said. She nodded. "But I think part of you does." And then she was gone. Alone again, I sat on the couch in the dark. And for the first time in nearly 30 years, I whispered into the silence, "Charlie, are you out there?" Because maybe Rachel wasn't just a mystery. Maybe she was the girl I never got to name. Maybe she was Charlotte. The email arrived at 1:17 a.m. Subject line: photo I found in an old box. Rachel had warned me she was going through some of her adoptive mother's things stored away after she passed. She said there were baby blankets, baptismal records, even a pair of hospital tags without names. I hadn't expected anything unusual, but when I opened the image attachment, my heart stopped. It was a photo of a woman in a hospital hallway, blurry, taken from mid-distance. The frame was skewed, the lighting yellowish. The focus was on a newborn wrapped in a pale blue cloth being wheeled past. But in the background, over the nurse's shoulder, stood a woman in a gown, her face half turned, eyes sunken, cheekbones sharp. Me. I stared at it for what felt like hours. It wasn't just that I looked like the woman. It was the shape of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, the mole on her left cheek. It was me. But I didn't remember the moment. I didn't remember standing there watching my own child being rolled away. Or was I watching someone else's? My stomach turned. I called Rachel immediately. She picked up on the first ring. "Where did you find this?" I asked. "In a shoebox, tucked between an old Bible and some birth announcement cards." "Do you know who took it?" "No, but the handwriting on the back says, 'Baby Charlotte, March 18th. The date sent a chill through my spine. March 18th. The day after I gave birth. The day I was told my baby had died. The day I was unconscious, or so I'd been told. My hands shook. "You're sure that's the name?" I asked. "Charlotte." "Yes." "I never told you that." She was silent. "I named my baby Charlotte," I said, my voice cracking. "I called her Charlie in my journal. But no one knew. Not even Jonah. I was planning to surprise him after the birth." Rachel didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, "I think I am her." I didn't sleep that night. I pulled out every box, every journal, every folder I had hidden in the corners of my house, the ones I'd told myself I would sort through someday. It felt like I was clawing through the ashes of my own life looking for a spark. I found the journal again, reread every entry, every craving, every dream, every moment I imagined meeting my daughter. And then the final entry. Just the date, March 17, 1996. No words. Just ink that had bled slightly into the paper over time, like tears. The next morning, I printed the photo. I stared at it under the light. There was no mistaking it. It was the same hallway where I was wheeled out of recovery. The same corner where I was told the nursery was off limits due to protocols. Why would someone take a photo like this? Who was it for? And why did it end up in Rachel's adoptive mother's things? I went back to the hospital. I asked for a list of all attending staff on March 17th and 18th, 1996. They told me that information was confidential. I told them I'd hire a lawyer. The receptionist blinked, then handed me a generic privacy form. I walked out seething. And for the first time in weeks, I felt rage. Not confusion. Not grief. Rage. That afternoon, Rachel came over. We laid the photo on the table between us. "I keep staring at it," she said, trying to remember. But I was a baby. There's nothing there. I know. But when I look at you, she said, voice trembling, I feel something. What? Like I've known you forever. I reached across the table and took her hand. I want to believe it, I whispered. You can, she said, because even if we never prove every step, I know who you are. The doorbell rang. It was a courier, a packet addressed to me. I opened it in front of Rachel. Inside was the hospital's incident review report from March 1996, something I had requested through my old medical credentials, not expecting they'd actually send it. The report was short. Too short. It listed 4 patients in the maternity ward. One listed as Code C, confidentiality override. No further data available. That was me. The others had full names. One infant listed as infant female, transferred to private custody. No name, no mother. Just custody transfer initiated March 18, 1996, 6:42 a.m. Rachel's hands were over her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. 6:42 a.m. That was the time listed on her adoption papers. The exact time she became someone else's child. I looked at her eyes, at her mouth, at the scar on her chin just like the one my sister had. Everything inside me broke and rebuilt. I think I'm ready, I said, for what she asked, her voice small. To call you my daughter. She started to cry. So did I. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt something open in me. Not just the grief, not just the fury, but the love. The kind that doesn't need proof to exist. I never thought I'd go back to that hospital a third time, let alone descend into its basement. But that's exactly where I found myself 3 days later, standing in front of a gray metal door marked Archives. Staff only. Rachel was beside me, quiet but unwavering. I had called in a favor, a big one. A former colleague of mine, now a department lead, pulled strings to give me 30 minutes in the off-site physical records room. Unsupervised. I told him I needed to close a personal file. He didn't ask questions. Bless him. The hallways smelled like damp paper and ammonia. Old records were stacked in steel cabinets that hissed when they opened. Everything was by hand. Logbooks, folders, carbon copies of incident reports. No digital backups here. I found the maternity log from March 1996. It was thick. A wide blue binder with peeling edges and a missing label. Inside names, dates, vitals, notations. Some pages were yellowed, some torn. I flipped to the date, March 17. There was my name, Evelyn Monroe, age 23, OB, Dr. Allen. Status, sedated. But instead of the next line reading delivery stillbirth like I'd always been told, it read, live birth, female. 6 lbs 14 Oz, no complications. My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the metal shelf to keep from falling. Rachel stepped forward. Are you okay? I pointed at the line. I was conscious enough to deliver. They just didn't tell me. There was more. Under infant disposition, a section for where the baby went after delivery was one word. Transferred. No nursery assignment. No mother contact. No ID ban noted. Just a cold bureaucratic word. Transferred. I turned the page. And there it was. Another entry written in a different pen. Infant, female. Tag Farseet 903. Held under provisional care pending external placement. There was no mother's name. No attending nurse listed. But the same doctor, Dr. Stephen Allen. My OB, my trusted physician. The man who'd smiled at me during every checkup and told me you're one of the lucky ones. I felt sick. I turned to Rachel. Her face was pale. You think he arranged it? She whispered. I think he orchestrated the whole thing. We took photos of the pages. Every line, every date, every mismatched pen stroke. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't just want the records. I wanted proof, evidence, fuel. Back upstairs, I asked to speak with someone in medical administration. I told them I wanted to file a complaint retroactive regarding Dr. Allen's handling of my 1996 case. The woman at the desk blinked. Dr. Stephen Allen, she asked. Yes. She hesitated. I think you should sit down. I didn't want to, but I did. She opened a database and turned her screen slightly away from my view. Then she said Dr. Allen passed away 12 years ago. 12 years. Gone. Dead. Out of reach. No consequences. No confession. No apology. Just silence. And yet, something in her tone felt off. Was he investigated? I asked. Another pause. Then a slow nod. There was a legal inquiry. Quiet. Sealed. Several families. All maternity cases. Babies. I can't say. Then tell me where to find someone who can. She hesitated again, and then gave me a name. That evening, I sat on my porch with Rachel. We didn't speak much. The sun was setting behind her, casting a soft gold halo around her hair, making her look ethereal, like someone I had imagined in dreams. She was holding a copy of the records. I was holding a glass of wine I couldn't drink. He took me from you, she said, breaking the silence, and gave me away. I think he sold you, I replied flatly. She nodded. I wonder how much I was worth. I reached for her hand. Too much for them to understand. She didn't cry. Neither did I. Not this time. We were too tired, too hollowed out by truths that had waited 3 decades to be heard. But even in the ache, there was something growing, not joy, not yet, but belonging. And it was enough to hold us upright. The next morning, I called the name the admin had given me. A woman named Grace Holloway, a retired legal auditor who had worked on closed ethics investigations for the hospital board. She answered after 2 rings. Ms. Holloway, this is Evelyn Monroe. Pause. I was wondering when you'd call. Grace Holloway had the voice of a woman who'd buried too many secrets. Low, crisp. The kind of tone that didn't ask questions, it issued them. We met at a neutral spot, an old law office she once worked at, now used mostly for mediation and quiet settlements. It smelled like mothballs and regret. She met me in the front lobby. Late 60s silver hair pulled back into a clean twist navy blazer buttoned too high. She held a thick envelope under her arm like a relic she was tired of carrying. I'm not supposed to show you any of this, she said even before we sat. But you will, I asked. She studied me. I read your file, and now I've seen your daughter's face. So yes, I will. We sat in a glass-walled conference room. She slid the envelope toward me. Dr. Stephen Allen ran obstetrics here for 17 years. He was charismatic, trusted, but he had a reputation for clean solutions, especially for girls from troubled backgrounds. I opened the folder. Dozens of pages, memos, internal complaints, anonymous reports. Some handwritten, some typed. All damning. Most of these women were sedated or vulnerable during birth. Grace continued. They were told their children died. Some never questioned it. Others tried. They were dismissed. My stomach churned. Were the babies adopted? I asked. No, not through legal channels. They were transferred. Sold, some of us believe. Allen had contacts, wealthy couples sometimes, international, always, private. I felt my throat close. She tapped a page in front of me. Yours was the first flagged incident, the start of the pattern. Your file was marked Code C for confidential custody transfer. It was our smoking gun, but by the time the investigation gained ground, Allen was gone. Gone? Resigned? Retired. Then he died. I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I read. Patient Evelyn Monroe, date March 17, 1996. Note: mother sedated prior to labor. Infant removed at 6:42 a.m. Custody code C transfer. No maternal consent obtained. There it was. Black ink on government paper. Proof. I wanted to rip it in half. Instead, I whispered, "Why wasn't I told?" "Because the hospital buried it," she said bluntly. "They paid settlements to a few families. The rest never knew." Was I paid? No. Yours was listed as a data loss case. By the time you might have pressed, the statute of limitations had passed. You were erased. I stared at the paper. My hands felt numb. "Why are you telling me this now?" Grace hesitated. "I carried this for decades. I couldn't say anything while I was under contract. But when Rachel's DNA match came through and her name crossed my screen, I remembered you. The mother who never got to hold her child. She's still here," I said, my voice thin. "She's in my life again." Grace smiled, but it was tired. "She's lucky." "No," I said, "I'm lucky." She handed me a flash drive. Everything's backed up here, just in case. Is this legal? Not remotely, she said. Then she leaned forward. But it's true. Rachel and I sat in silence that night as I told her everything. She had one hand on the flash drive. Her thumb traced its plastic edges like it might burn her. So I was trafficked, she asked, voice hollow. Stolen, then sold. She nodded. Then. And no one stopped him. They didn't even try. We didn't cry. Not because we didn't want to, but because rage is a dry fire. It burns everything, even the tears. That night, she asked to stay over. She curled on my couch with a blanket, feet tucked beneath her like she belonged there. I watched her sleep, peaceful, unaware, or pretending. And in the dark, I whispered, I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. I lay awake until dawn, scrolling through the files Grace gave me. And there, it was tucked into the back of a legal complaint. A name. Not mine. Not Rachel's. But someone listed as custody recipient, contact 1996 Bay Area. The address blurred. The name Margaret L. Jensen. I woke Rachel at 7 a.m. She blinked at me, confused. We found her, I said. Who? The woman who raised you. Rachel's breath caught. My mom, your other mom. We didn't go right away. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in the blanket from the night before, staring at the name on the screen. Margaret L. Jensen. Her hand hovered over her mouth like it was holding something in a scream, a sob, a truth she didn't want to touch. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then I don't know what scares me more. Finding her, or finding out she knew. We found the address through public records. A small coastal town 2 hours north. The house was listed under Margaret's name, mortgage paid off 10 years ago. We drove in silence. Rachel kept glancing at her reflection in the window like she was trying to decide which version of herself would show up. The stolen child. The daughter. The stranger. I wanted to reach for her hand. But I didn't know if I was allowed to. Margaret Jensen lived in a white craftsman house with ivy curling up the porch posts, hydrangeas in bloom, an American flag gently waving in the breeze. It didn't look like the kind of place where secrets lived. But then neither did the hospital. Rachel sat in the car while I walked up and knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Late 70s. Gray bob. Thin lips. Eyes that had once been sharp but now looked like they'd learned to blur what they didn't want to see. Can I help you? She asked. I took a breath. My name is Evelyn Monroe. The air shifted. She said nothing. So I added, I think you knew my daughter. She didn't invite me in. But she didn't slam the door either. Instead, she stepped outside, closing the door behind her like she didn't want the house to hear. I knew this day might come, she said. Just like that. No denial, no confusion. Just resignation. Then you knew, I said, my voice tight. I didn't at first. What changed? She looked at the car, saw Rachel watching through the glass. I watched her grow, she said quietly. And I knew no child that perfect came to me without cost. We sat on the porch. Rachel stayed in the car, frozen. Margaret sat stiffly like a woman waiting for judgment. I was told she was an unwanted child, she said. That the mother had relinquished rights. She wasn't unwanted, I said. Margaret's eyes flicked to mine. I know that now. Did you pay for her? Silence. Then, we gave a donation. To the hospital. Through a liaison. That's what they called it. A donation. It was legal. At least that's what we were told. My husband? He wanted a child. We couldn't have one. We were desperate. So you took mine. Margaret flinched. I didn't know she had a name. She did. Charlotte. Her hand went to her mouth. She always called herself Charlie. I thought it was strange. But maybe. She remembered. The door creaked open. Rachel stepped out. Her feet were heavy on the steps, each one a declaration. She walked right up to Margaret. Didn't smile. Didn't cry. Just said, "Did you ever love me?" Margaret didn't answer for a long time. Then, "Yes. From the moment I held you. Even when I was afraid of where you came from." Rachel's voice broke. "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you'd hate me." "I do." And then softer, but not for loving me. For lying. Margaret nodded. "I don't deserve forgiveness." Rachel stood there still as glass. "You don't get to decide that." And she turned and walked back to the car. I followed. We drove for a long time. Rachel didn't speak. Until she wasn't evil. But she let evil happen. Yes, I said. She wasn't my mother. No, I said. She wasn't. Then very quietly Rachel whispered, "You are." And I had to pull the car over because I couldn't see through the tears. That night she stayed with me again. We didn't talk about Margaret. We made dinner. We watched old movies. And in the quietest moment while I was drying a dish, Rachel said, "I feel like I've been living someone else's life." I looked at her. "You're not," I said. "You're reclaiming your own." The next day she asked if she could see my childhood photos. I showed her everything, scrapbooks, journals, the worn corners of my life. She stared at one photo of me at age 10. "You look like me here," she said. "No," I replied, smiling. "You look like me." Justice isn't what you think it is. It doesn't walk in with a badge and offer to fix the past. It doesn't hand you an apology, a check, or a cell door key. And it certainly doesn't knock at your door offering to make you whole. Justice, I've learned, is cold. It's quiet. It hides behind procedures and timelines and legal language that says, what happened to you is real, but it's not prosecutable. That was the day I realized the world wasn't built to give women like me closure. Rachel and I arrived at the attorney's office at precisely 10:00 a.m., clutching a folder thick with truth copies of the medical record from 1996 photos of the logbook. Grace had helped us find the photo Rachel had uncovered labeled Charlotte, and the chain of events we'd written out in excruciating detail. We walked in like survivors. But we were hoping to walk out like plaintiffs. The office was high-rise, sterile, and gray. Corporate carpet. Coffee machines humming faintly in the background. The woman we met was Lana Preston, a civil attorney who had once worked in medical defense, but now specialized in exposing hospitals who'd failed patients. Her eyes were sharp, her questions sharper. We told her everything. How Rachel and I had met through a DNA test. How the records from my hospital stay contradicted what I'd always been told. How we had documentation showing my child had been listed as transferred, not deceased. How Dr. Allen, now dead, had once overseen several suspicious births flagged in Grace Holloway's old files. We showed her everything. And when we were done, Lana sat back, folded her fingers together on the desk, and said 7 words I wasn't ready for. "It's a compelling story, but not actionable." My stomach dropped. Rachel blinked. "What do you mean?" Lana's voice was calm, practiced the tone of someone who'd walked others through this kind of disappointment before. "The legal term is statute of limitations. For medical malpractice or misconduct, the window for filing a claim is typically 2 to 6 years after the injury, or 2 years from the discovery of the injury. Since Dr. Allen is deceased and the hospital buried the complaint, it would be extremely hard to bring a civil case unless you could tie living individuals directly to a deliberate conspiracy. But we just discovered it," I said. "I know," she replied. "But the law doesn't always acknowledge delayed discovery the way it should." Rachel crossed her arms. "So what now?" "Nothing, there are options," Lana said gently. "You can go public. Share your story. You have documentation enough to force the hospital to respond publicly. Media pressure, not legal pressure, may bring out other voices. Other mothers, other daughters. But no jail time," I said bitterly. "No justice." Lana looked down. "No legal justice. Not in the way you're hoping." When we walked out of that office, I felt like we had walked straight back into 1996, into the maternity ward, into silence. I wanted to scream. I wanted someone to blame, someone to point at and say, "That person is the reason I lost 30 years with my child." But there was no one left. Dr. Allen was in the ground. His accomplices were either retired or hiding behind sealed HR records. The hospital had wiped its hands clean decades ago, and Rachel and I, we were the ones left trying to piece together a life. We didn't speak in the car for the first 10 minutes. The folder sat between us like a third passenger, heavy with truth and equally heavy with disappointment. Then Rachel spoke. You know what I keep thinking about? What all the times I felt like I didn't belong, like I didn't look like my mom, like I didn't feel like her child. And now I realize, maybe my gut always knew. I turned to her. You did belong. You do belong. Just not where you were placed. She nodded, lips pressed together. And what about you? She asked. What do you feel? I stared ahead at the road, like someone robbed me of you and no one will ever pay. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too still. I walked through the rooms in the dark, past the photographs I hadn't updated in years, past the hallway where I used to pause, hand on my belly back when I believed I was going to become a mother. I ended up in my office, turned on my laptop, opened a blank document, and for the first time I wrote my story. My name is Evelyn Monroe. In 1996, I gave birth to a daughter. They told me she died, but she didn't. She was taken. This is how I found her again. The words poured out of me like blood from a wound. I wrote until sunrise. I didn't edit. I didn't proofread. I just told the truth. When Rachel woke up, I showed her the post. She read every word, silent, intent. When she finished, she whispered, "It's time people knew." So I hit publish. Anonymous for now. But it was out there. And what happened next surprised both of us. Hundreds of comments. Women who had hazy births. Adopted children who never saw their original records. Nurses who had witnessed quiet transfers and didn't know how to stop them. One woman said she remembered Dr. Allen, said her sister's child vanished from that same hospital in 1994. Another said she'd worked with a clerk who handled donation-based adoptions under the table. Another posted, "I thought I was crazy for thinking I was stolen. Now I think I might be right." Rachel and I sat side by side at the kitchen table reading each one. She rested her chin on her hand. "Maybe this is justice," she said. "Not the kind I wanted," I admitted. "No," she said, "but maybe the kind that helps someone else escape the dark." We didn't get a lawsuit, or a trial, or a headline that said, "Stolen baby reunited with mother after 30 years. But we got something else. A signal flare in the night sky for anyone else lost in the same fog. A community. A sisterhood of survivors. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing of all. You never forget the face of someone who was there when your life changed. Sometimes they were only in the room for minutes. Sometimes they didn't speak. But their presence lingers like a scent in the air, like a shadow in the corner. For me, that person was Nurse Lorraine. Her name had surfaced briefly in the logs we uncovered with Grace signed next to a 4:56 a.m. shift change on the night Rachel was born. A note about administering sedatives per Dr. Allen's instructions. Nothing more. At the time, I thought little of it. But that night, after Lana's legal door slammed shut, I couldn't sleep. I was scrolling through scanned pages of old staff rosters when I saw her name again, Lorraine DuPont. RN, Obstetrics Rotation Spring 1996. She'd signed out of her position in 1997. No forwarding contact listed. It was a long shot, but long shots were all I had left. I Googled her. Nothing. I searched old nursing forums, obituary lists, Facebook, and then tucked in the alumni newsletter of a local nursing college I found her. Lorraine DuPont, 71, retired in Arizona, once affiliated with St. Agnes Memorial Hospital. That was it. A week later, I was boarding a plane. Rachel didn't join me. She said it felt like a journey I needed to take alone. I think she was right. I arrived in Tucson under a pale morning sun, the desert air dry and clear. Lorraine's address, pulled from a public records site, led to a modest Adobe-style house with a single saguaro cactus out front and a hummingbird feeder on the porch. I knocked. The woman who answered was small, with wispy gray hair, and a face that had clearly once been striking. Her eyes, still sharp, blinked in surprise. "Lorraine DuPont." Yes, I introduced myself, told her I was looking for information about a birth in 1996 at St. Agnes. I watched her expression shift from curiosity to something harder to name: caution, memory, maybe shame. Are you a reporter? She asked. No, I'm Evelyn Monroe. I was a patient there. You were the attending nurse during my delivery. She opened the screen door wider. Come in. Her living room was quiet and warm, a quilt draped over the back of a recliner, classical music playing faintly in the background. She brought tea, sat opposite me, and waited. I pulled out the photo of Rachel marked Charlotte, then the copied log with her signature, then finally the photo of myself at 22 right before I gave birth. I believe my baby was taken that night, I said. And I believe you were there. She didn't deny it. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered, I remember you. Her voice shook when she spoke. It took her a long time to tell the whole truth. How she was young then, afraid. How Dr. Allen had a way of recruiting nurses into quiet handoffs, convincing them that the mothers were unfit. The children were better off elsewhere, that it was all part of a system larger than them. They called them compassion placements, she said. They, I asked. There were 3 of them. Dr. Allen, a woman in administration named Margot Casewell, and a private adoption lawyer who'd come in with the papers already drawn. And you helped them? I did what I was told, she whispered. I sedated you. I held your baby for 30 seconds before she was taken to a different room. I didn't know her name. I didn't know where she went. But I knew it wasn't right. I knew it. Her eyes filled with tears. I've never forgiven myself. The rage inside me wanted to rise. But another part of me, the part shaped by all the nights I wept, not knowing why I couldn't remember holding my baby, just sat in silence, letting it wash over me. Why now, she asked. Why come all this way? Because my daughter found me, I said, and I needed to know who looked at us, and let it happen. She nodded quiet. Then she said something I didn't expect. There were others. I froze. Other mothers? Yes. I kept a list. I didn't dare take hospital records, but I remembered names. I wrote them down. I kept them, because I thought, one day someone might come. She left the room, returned with an old manila envelope weathered yellowed. Inside were handwritten notes. Names, dates, room numbers. Most were between 1992 and 1997, at least a dozen. Some marked with a faint X in the corner. Some with the word reassignment. And mine, room 206. Sedated. No maternal contact. Infant female. I stared at the page. I didn't cry. Not yet. But my heart felt like it was splitting open and healing all at once. I tried to speak out once, she said. But no one believed me. I was dismissed as emotional, unreliable. It broke me. So I stayed quiet. You don't have to stay quiet anymore, I said. She looked up at me. And for the first time since I arrived, I saw something shift in her face. Hope. I left with a copy of the list, her permission to use her testimony, and her quiet blessing. You're the first one who ever came back, she said at the door. I won't be the last, I told her. She watched me walk away with trembling hands, holding onto the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I flew home the next morning, envelope in hand, and this time Rachel was waiting at the gate. When I handed her the list, her fingers trembled too. What now, she asked. Now, I said, we find them. Some people say the past can't hurt you, but they've never opened a door knowing it might hold the answer to the moment their entire life unraveled. That door stood in front of me, painted pale blue and sun-bleached at the edges, with a tiny porch in Tucson, Arizona, the address of the nurse who signed off on my daughter's disappearance. Her name was Lorraine DuPont, and I had come to ask if she remembered. I flew alone. Rachel had offered to come, but I needed this one for myself. To look someone in the eye and ask the question that had haunted my sleep. Were you there when they took her from me? The drive from the airport was quiet. My GPS chirped its robotic directions, but all I could hear was my heart beating in my ears. Her home was modest, pink stone walls, white wind chimes hanging from the awning, the kind of place that screamed peace, not secrets. I knocked. When Lorraine opened the door, she looked exactly as I imagined. 70s. Soft gray hair pulled into a twist, thin frame, eyes that had seen too much and perhaps regretted just as much. Yes, she asked, cautious. My name is Evelyn Monroe, I said. I think you were the nurse during my delivery at St. Agnes Hospital. March 1996. Room 206. For a second, she didn't move. Then slowly she opened the door wider and nodded. Come in. The living room was warm, clean. A piano in the corner, an old quilt draped over a beige recliner. The scent of eucalyptus lingered in the air. I make tea at this hour, she said more to herself than me. You drink chamomile? I nodded. She returned with two mismatched mugs, placed one in front of me, and sat down across the coffee table. She didn't ask me to explain why I was here. She didn't try to deflect. Instead, she said, I remember your face. And I froze. You came in late? She continued. You were anxious. No partner with you. There was something wrong with your chart. They'd marked your due date incorrectly, I think. But Dr. Allen insisted we proceed. Her hands trembled slightly. I didn't understand until much later what was happening. What was happening, I asked, though I already knew. She swallowed hard. They called it compassionate reassignment. They would identify mothers they believed were unfit, low-income single, or with mental health flags. They would sedate them before delivery, ensure no contact, and the baby would be transferred. The mothers were told their child had died. The paperwork was sealed. I stared at her. You knew I was new. I was terrified. And I obeyed. It felt like I'd been punched. For years I had imagined Dr. Allen as the sole villain. Now I saw the machine behind him, the silent compliance, the smiling nurses, the complicity that stretched beyond one man. Did you see my daughter? I asked. Lorraine looked down. I held her, just for a moment. Then Margot, the administrator, took her down the hall. You were unconscious. I tried to speak up afterward, but I was told to mind my place, that I'd misunderstood. She looked up at me and her eyes filled with tears. I've lived with that guilt every day. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her. But all I could say was, why now? Why talk to me now? Because you asked, she said, and because I kept something. A list. She left the room, returned with a battered manila envelope. Inside notes, pages with names, dates, mothers' room numbers, babies' birth weights. Mine was there. Room 206. Evelyn Monroe. Female infant. No maternal contact. Transferred. She had written it by hand. I knew what they were doing was wrong, she said. I didn't stop them. But I remembered every name, in case someone ever came looking. I ran my finger down the page. 11 other names. 11 other women. You kept this all these years. I didn't know what to do with it. Well, now I do, I said. We sat in silence. I can testify, she whispered. If it helps, I can sign a statement. It might not change the law, I replied, but it will change the story. That night, I stayed in a motel near the airport. I didn't sleep. I held that envelope to my chest like it was my daughter herself. In the morning, I flew home. Rachel met me at the gate. Her arms were already outstretched, her eyes scanning my face for news. She remembered me, I said. She remembered you. We sat at our kitchen table, spreading the pages between us like puzzle pieces. She said the administrator was named Margot Casewell, I explained. Still alive somewhere. She helped process the adoptions. Maybe ran the whole thing. Rachel's eyes lit with fire. Then let's find her. We didn't eat. We didn't sleep. We searched. Old HR databases, state licensing boards, nursing forums, alumni groups. By midnight, we had a lead. Margot Casewell, now 79, living in Oregon. Retired, but once served as director of patient transition services for 3 different hospitals, including St. Agnes. I stared at her face on the screen. This was the woman who took my baby from my arms and built a career from doing it to others. My stomach churned. Rachel placed her hand over mine. Do you want to confront her? I met her eyes. Yes, but not alone. She nodded. Then let's do it together. People think closure is a courtroom, that it's a confession, a headline, a final scene with dramatic music swelling in the background. But sometimes closure is a voice you've never heard before, uttering a lie you've waited 30 years to expose. Her name was Margot Casewell, and when we found her, she wasn't in hiding. She was giving lectures. The internet gave us more than a name, it gave us a location. Margot had retired from hospital administration but remained active. She served on the board of a private adoption consultancy that described itself as a high-integrity placement network. A glossy brochure on their website promised preserving dignity for all birth mothers. Rachel read it out loud and then threw it across the table. Then she found the photo. That's her, she whispered, pointing at the screen. That's the woman I remember. From the hallway. I was maybe 5, but her voice, it stayed with me. Margot Casewell was scheduled to speak at a panel discussion the following week in Portland, Oregon. The title, Navigating Ethical Adoptions in the Modern Era. The irony made me physically ill. We bought 2 tickets. The conference was pristine, corporate, buzzing with soft jazz in the elevators and efficient smiles at the check-in table. Everyone wore name tags. Rachel and I wore none. We sat near the back. Then she walked onto the stage. White hair perfectly styled, pearl earrings. She wore a charcoal suit with a silk scarf, the kind of woman who had learned long ago how to exude professional warmth while building a fortress around her conscience. I watched her take her seat, cross her legs, and nod to the moderator with that serene little smile. Rachel squeezed my hand. She began speaking with effortless authority, polished, rehearsed. Ethical adoption, she said, starts with acknowledging the complexity of motherhood, the sanctity of informed consent, and the moral courage to do what's best for the child, even when it's hard. The audience nodded. I nearly choked. I didn't realize I was shaking until Rachel leaned in and said, "You ready?" I nodded. The Q&A was polite, controlled. Then Rachel stood up. Her voice was steady, quieter than I expected, but that only made the silence that followed louder. "Ms. Casewell," she said, "were you involved with St. Agnes Memorial Hospital in the 1990s? Margot blinked. "Yes," she said, smiling. "I served as a transition coordinator there in the 90s. Why do you ask?" Rachel took one step forward. "Because I was born there in 1996. Or rather, I was stolen from there. And I believe you were the one who took me." Gasps. Margot froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Then I stood up beside Rachel. "I'm Evelyn Monroe," I said. "They told me my baby died. But she didn't. She's standing right next to me." The room spun in tension. No moderator moved. No security stepped in. Only silence. "I don't know what you're referring to," Margot said, voice thin. "This feels inappropriate." "We have records," Rachel said. "Signed logs. A nurse who remembers your voice, your face. She saw you take me down a hallway before I ever saw my mother. Young lady, you've clearly been misled." Rachel stepped closer. "Then say it. Say you didn't participate in the quiet adoptions. Say you didn't sign off on falsified charts. Say you didn't profit off transferring babies without consent." Margot's face twisted. "I acted within the legal parameters of the time. Legal doesn't mean moral," I snapped. "Legal doesn't mean humane." Murmurs from the crowd, and then a voice from the back. I gave birth at St. Agnes in 1995. I never saw my son. They said he died. Another. I was told my records were sealed for my protection. A third. I asked for my baby back. They said I had changed my mind. I never did. 4 women. 5. And Margot. She just stared. Pale. Frozen. A woman unraveling in real time. I think she said finally this discussion is over. But for us it was just beginning. Outside we stood in the sun. The air was cool. Rachel's hands trembled. She looked at me and said, "Do you think she'll be held accountable?" "Not by a court," I said. "But the world knows now. The room knows." She nodded. I took out my phone. Took a picture of her right then standing under a blue sky, hair caught in the wind, tears drying on her cheeks. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like truth. And truth, when spoken out loud, is its own kind of justice. That night we went live with the story. This time with our names. With Lorraine's testimony. With Margot's silence. We didn't wait for the media to call us. We called them. And the comments poured in. Not pity. Not outrage. But solidarity. I thought I was the only one. I've never told anyone until now. This finally explains what happened to my sister. And beneath it all, the same 2 words again and again: me too. Grief is slippery. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't follow rules. It doesn't arrive when you expect it to, and it never leaves politely. It shows up in the middle of dinner when Rachel's laughing at a story from her job, and I suddenly realize I wasn't there for any of it. It slides into the room at night when I hear a creak in the hallway, and for a second think of a toddler who was never there. Some days I handled it like a soldier. Other days it buried me. And yet, every morning I woke up. Because she was here now. Because stolen time was still time, and I wasn't going to lose another second. Rachel had moved in temporarily. Just a month or 2, she'd said. But the boxes kept multiplying in the guest room, and soon her shampoo sat next to mine. Her books were in the living room, and her laughter filled corners of the house that hadn't heard joy in years. We were learning each other, in the strangest way. I learned she liked her coffee black and her cereal soggy. She learned I snored when I was overtired. I learned she hummed when she cooked. She learned I cried in the laundry room when I thought no one was watching. We didn't call it healing, but something about it felt like that. Then the letter came. It wasn't in a courtroom envelope or from the hospital. It was hand-delivered by courier. Thick cream stock. No return address. Rachel found it on the porch. To Ms. Evelyn Monroe and Ms. Rachel Monroe, Confidential. We opened it together. The first page was typed. Precise. Formal. It was from a private attorney in Manhattan representing an anonymous client with connections to the St. Agnes Memorial Hospital Oversight Board in the 1990s. We read it 3 times before either of us spoke. The offer was this: a formal written acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a private payout 7 figures, a signed affidavit verifying that Rachel Monroe was indeed misclassified as deceased due to an administrative oversight in 1996, and finally a condition. No public interviews, no lawsuits, no naming names. Silence. Forever. Rachel pushed her chair back hard enough that it screeched against the floor. "This is a payoff," she snapped. "They're paying to erase us. They're trying to buy back our silence," I agreed. But we sat in silence anyway, not because we were agreeing, but because the weight of what this meant hit us at the same time. This was proof. Proof someone knew. Proof they were scared. Proof we weren't just shouting into the void anymore. "Why now?" Rachel asked. "Because the story's getting louder," I said. "Because people are listening." I turned to her slowly. "What do you want to do?" She stared at the letter, eyes sharp. Then she picked it up, walked it to the sink, and turned on the faucet. I watched it dissolve in her hands. "We tell the world," she said. "No matter what." That same night, a message landed in my inbox. From Lorraine, the nurse. It was a video. She looked pale, older than I remembered. The background was a plain wall, probably her bedroom. She didn't wear makeup. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the camera. Then she spoke. "My name is Lorraine Parker. I was a nurse at St. Agnes Memorial Hospital from 1987 to 1999. In 1996, I witnessed a newborn removed from room 413 under false classification. The mother was sedated. The child was listed as deceased. But I saw her being carried into the administrative wing. I was told never to speak of it. I lived with that guilt for 3 decades. The woman I saw that day is Evelyn Monroe, and the baby was Rachel. I'm ready to testify." Rachel sat beside me, jaw clenched, hand trembling. I reached out and held her palm in both of mine. We weren't alone anymore. Not in memory. Not in evidence. Not in truth. Within 2 days, a journalist from a major national outlet reached out. She'd read our anonymous post. She'd found the nurse. She wanted to write a story, a real one, with names, with facts, with documents. Rachel was hesitant at first. "Will people believe us?" I looked at her. "They already do." We scheduled the interview. 3 hours, 2 coffees, 1 full box of tissues. Rachel told her everything from the earliest moments of confusion to the aching realization of truth. I told her what it was like to wake up from anesthesia and be handed a lie. We gave her every document, every photo, every name. We told her we didn't want money, we wanted the world to see. The article went live the following Friday. Front page, full feature, title, "The Baby They Said Died a Mother and Daughter, Reunite After a Decades-Long Hospital Lie." Within an hour, it was trending nationwide. TV stations called, podcasts, book agents, law firms. But none of that mattered as much as the messages from women like me. Women who knew something had been wrong but were told they were crazy. Adopted children who finally had words for a feeling they couldn't shake. Staff who worked at St. Agnes in the 90s offering quiet confirmations of shady paperwork, whispered orders, unmarked files. Rachel and I read them all, and for the first time in my life, I felt something close to powerful. Not because we had won anything, but because we had started something. Because we'd shown others that silence wasn't the only option. One night, about a week later, Rachel and I sat on the porch. Stars overhead, tea in hand. No words. Then she asked softly, "Do you ever wonder what my childhood would have been like? If I'd grown up here?" I looked at her for a long time. "No," I said, "because I don't need to imagine what we lost." I reached over, brushed her hair behind her ear. "I only want to feel what we've found." She smiled, then leaned her head on my shoulder. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt like a mother. Not in name, not in memory, but in being, in presence. In the quiet, sacred, irreversible fact of now. I used to think the worst thing was losing a child. I was wrong. The worst thing is having the truth in your hands and watching the world turn away. Because truth isn't always welcome. Not when it's inconvenient. Not when it implicates powerful people. Not when it threatens institutions that built their reputations on silence. 3 days after the article dropped, I received a letter in the mail. Not a message. Not a call. A letter typed unsigned, postmarked from Albany. "You've made a dangerous mistake. For your daughter's safety, retract the story. People are watching. No return address." Just that. And my heart collapsed in on itself. I wanted to believe it was a prank. I wanted to believe the world wouldn't punish a woman for telling the truth about her stolen baby. But fear doesn't care what you believe. It settles in your bones, and it lingers. I didn't show Rachel right away. She was glowing. The story had gone viral, but more than that, people were contacting her directly. Women her age who were adopted and now questioning the stories they'd been told. A teacher who remembered her as a quiet girl in kindergarten with unusual withdrawal symptoms. A woman in her 50s who'd seen Rachel's picture and wrote, "She looks just like my cousin did before she vanished." Rachel had started compiling a file, a timeline, a list of hospitals, patterns, missing children. It was growing. She was growing. And I couldn't bear to dim that light with a threat from the shadows. But that night, while she was brushing her teeth, she caught me staring at the letter again. "Is that what I think it is?" I handed it to her. She read it slowly, mouth tightening. Then she said, "Good." "Good," I repeated. "It means we're a threat. It means we're close to something bigger." And then she walked away fearless. I sat there and shook. The next attack wasn't a letter. It was an article, anonymous blog, hidden domain. The headline read, "Evelyn Monroe, grieving mother or media manipulator." They accused me of inventing the story for attention, of exploiting adoption trauma for money. They posted an old photo of me crying after Rachel's birth, a photo I'd never seen before. Someone had access to my medical files. Rachel's. They even referenced our visit to Lana Preston's office. And then came the emails. Hundreds. Some supportive, some horrifying. One read, "Be a shame if that daughter you love disappeared again." Rachel didn't flinch, but I did. Because when you've already lost your child once, you don't gamble with fate. I called Lana. I told her everything. She said we weren't alone, that when people go up against legacy institutions, the backlash is always ugly. They'll try to discredit you before they admit what they did, she said. Then she paused. "And Evelyn? I think it's time we escalate." Within a week, she filed a civil claim, not just against St. Agnes Memorial, but against the medical board that had covered up their internal audits, against the private adoption agency that employed Margot Casewell, against the legal team that had offered us hush money. We didn't expect to win. But this wasn't about winning. It was about putting it on record, dragging the truth into the light, screaming, kicking ugly if needed, but out there for the world to see. Rachel's name was the first on the filing. Mine was second. Then came the interviews, daytime TV, true crime podcasts. A journalist from Europe flew in for a feature on ghost mothers, women whose children were declared dead at birth without ever seeing a body. And suddenly, we weren't an anomaly. We were part of a pattern, a global pattern. Brazil, Ireland, the Philippines, Ukraine, Canada, hospitals, churches, orphanages, midwife clinics. Everywhere the same story told by different faces, and at the center women, mothers, silenced, grieving. But finally, no longer alone. One afternoon, Rachel came home, cheeks flushed, holding a folder. "You need to see this," she said. "Inside a birth record from a hospital outside Baltimore. Different name. Same doctor. Different baby. Same infant deceased stamp with no death certificate. And in the top corner, transfer authorized by M. Casewell." Rachel looked at me, breath shaking. She didn't just do this once. I nodded. She built a career on it. Rachel sat beside me and whispered, "How many of us are there?" The story was no longer ours. It was everyone's. And when the news broke that Margot Casewell had resigned from her board position due to health reasons, we knew it wasn't illness that pushed her out. It was exposure. The next week, the hospital released a statement. "We are reviewing historical records of patient care from the 1990s and 2000s, particularly surrounding adoption procedures. We take these allegations seriously." But no apology. No names. Just a press release carefully worded to say nothing. Still, it was something. It was movement. And sometimes, that's where revolution begins. That night, Rachel and I sat in my office surrounded by papers, timelines, affidavits. She looked at me and said, "Do you regret any of it?" I didn't even need to think. No, I said. I regret the 30 years they took from us, but not this. She reached for my hand. I used to feel like I was floating, she said. Like my life didn't start anywhere real. Now, I feel anchored. I squeezed her hand. You are. And I realized for the first time in my life that maybe I was too. Later, as I was locking up, I found an envelope slid under the door. My heart pounded. But this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a letter. Handwritten. No signature. Just this: I worked under Margot. I saw things I wish I hadn't. I'm ready to talk. I want to do what's right. Another voice. Another crack in the wall. The silence was breaking, and nothing, not threats, not money, not institutions, could seal it shut again. You can spend your whole life chasing truth, but nothing prepares you for what happens when it actually shows up. Because truth doesn't come gently, it crashes in, shatters what's left of your illusions, and sometimes it brings someone with it you prayed you'd never have to face again. The letter was signed a former colleague of Margot's. I know where the records are kept. It had an address, a storage unit in upstate New York. Rachel and I didn't hesitate. We drove 6 hours through fog and rain, following a location that might have been a dead end or a door. The unit was clean, unmarked, and located behind a row of silent metal doors. Number 184. We had the temporary code from the source who contacted us, someone who refused to meet in person, but claimed to have worked under Margot's direction during the quiet adoption years. I half expected to find an empty space. Instead, when the metal rolled up, what stared back at us was a wall of boxes, dozens, labeled, dated, stamped archived adoption protocols. Rachel let out a sharp breath. "Oh my God," she whispered. We had found the vault. We spent hours inside, and what we saw broke us. Folders thick with forged signatures, transfer orders, fake death certificates, whole birth charts altered with whiteout and retyped into the system. Photos of babies, some with first names, some labeled unnamed female or male infant, no ID. Rachel found one with a Polaroid paperclip to it, a girl about 3 years old sitting in a hospital hallway. The label read, "Repositioned to Virginia family confirmed." Her eyes looked scared. I had to step outside to breathe. It was bigger than us. This wasn't just negligence. This was trafficking disguised as medical discretion. We made copies of everything we could. Rachel digitized documents. I cross-referenced names with the list she'd been building. It was a system, a pattern, and in every thread of it, Margot's name, her initials, her sign-off. She hadn't just participated, she had orchestrated. The woman who spoke on stages about preserving dignity had stolen it from mothers like me, over and over. We called Lana that night, sent her everything. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "We need to go federal." And suddenly, it wasn't just a civil case anymore. It was a criminal one. But the real twist came 2 days later. Rachel had just finished uploading our files to an encrypted drive when I heard her gasp in the living room. I ran in. She was staring at her phone. "What is it?" I asked. Her voice was paper thin. "I got a message. From my adoptive mother." I froze. Now she nodded. She saw the article. She saw the photo. And she wants to talk. My heart felt like it dropped into my stomach. "What did she say?" Rachel handed me the phone. "Rachel, I know I don't deserve to ask anything of you. I know what you've learned must feel like betrayal. But I need to explain. There's more you don't know. I never meant to hurt you. Please, meet me. Just once." Marilyn. Rachel looked at me. What do? I wanted to scream no. I wanted to protect her from more heartbreak. But it wasn't my choice. So I said, "Do you want me to go with you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." We met Marilyn at a park halfway between our cities. Neutral ground. It was fall. Leaves everywhere. families laughing in the distance, a child blowing bubbles on a bench nearby. And then I saw her, Marilyn, the woman who raised my daughter. She was older, frailer than I remembered from photos. Her hands trembled. Her eyes were swollen. She stood when Rachel approached, and when she opened her mouth, her voice cracked. "I didn't know," she said. Not at first. Rachel's face didn't soften. At first, Marilyn reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "I was told it was a private placement, that the mother didn't want to be contacted. I didn't ask questions, but years later I tried to find your records." She opened the folder. Inside were letters, unanswered inquiries, a sealed birth certificate, a copy of a blank file labeled Charlotte, closed transfer 1996. "I suspected," she said, "but I was scared. I thought if I pushed, they'd take you away." She looked at Rachel, tears falling now. "I loved you, but I was a coward, and for that, I'll never stop being sorry." Rachel stood completely still, then finally asked, "Do you know who arranged the adoption?" Marilyn nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "It was Margot. She's the one who told us it was all above board. She even gave me a private pediatrician recommendation. She made us believe we were saving you from a terrible situation." My chest tightened. It was all connected. Every thread, every lie, every stolen moment. Margot had built this machine, and we had been cogs in it. After a long silence, Rachel finally said, "I believe you loved me." Marilyn let out a sob. "But love doesn't erase what was done. I can't pretend this didn't happen." "I don't want you to pretend," Marilyn said. "I just wanted you to know the truth. From me." Then she turned to me. "I never knew your name. Until last week. I... I'm sorry." I nodded stiffly. "I know you raised her, and I thank you for the kindness you gave her. But you were given something that wasn't yours to take." She looked down. "I know. We parted with no promises, no hugs, just silence." Rachel was quiet in the car. Then she said, "She's not my enemy." "No," I agreed. "But she's not your origin either." She looked at me. "You are." I nearly drove off the road. That night, Lana called again. She had news. The files we uncovered had been submitted to the Department of Health and Human Services. A task force had been formed. Margot was being investigated not just for falsified records, but for conspiracy, illegal adoption facilitation, and obstruction of justice. She could face prison. It wasn't justice yet. But it was the first time we could see it from where we stood. I walked into Rachel's room that night. She was at her desk, headphones on, working on a spreadsheet of names. I sat on the bed. She turned, removed the headphones. "Hey," she said softly. "I just wanted to tell you," I said, "I'm proud of you." She blinked. "Why?" "Because you faced all of this. And you didn't run. You didn't collapse. You fought." She swallowed hard. "I'm proud of you too, Mom." She said it so easily, like it belonged, like it had always been there, and maybe somehow it had. I used to think being a mother was about biology, blood, birth, bonding. But now I know it's about presence. It's about truth, even when it hurts. And it's about showing up when the world has tried to erase you. The federal investigation took months. We weren't allowed to speak about much once the task force made contact. But we kept gathering stories, anonymous submissions from other women, adopted children, nurses, even an orderly who had helped transport infants late at night down unfamiliar corridors. Each testimony layered onto the mountain we'd built. And when the grand jury convened, the weight was finally too much to ignore. Margot Casewell was indicted on 7 felony counts: forgery, fraud, conspiracy, perjury, obstruction. The news outlets ran the story with headlines like "Architect of Quiet Adoption," "Ring Faces Federal Charges," "Mother and Daughter," "Expose Decades-Long Hospital Cover-Up." The woman who fought back and won, Rachel, didn't celebrate with champagne. She celebrated by printing every letter we received and carefully storing them in labeled binders. One read simply, "Because of you, I found my birth mother. We met last weekend." She cried for an hour and then held my hand like she'd never let go. That was worth more than a trial, more than a sentence. That was restoration. We never got an apology from the hospital. They rebranded. New name, new board, new marketing, like a snake shedding skin and pretending it was never venomous. But they couldn't erase the records. Not anymore. Not with so many eyes watching. Not with so many voices finally rising from the silence. The courts would handle Margot, but we, the mothers, the daughters, the stolen we, handled the story, and we made sure it would never be buried again. 6 months later, Rachel moved into her own apartment. Not because she was running away, but because she was finally walking toward something, a life she chose. She got a part-time job with a legal aid group that helps adopted individuals access sealed records. She started organizing community calls for people still searching for their families. She even began writing her own story, not as my daughter, not as a victim, but as a woman who rebuilt herself one truth at a time. On her last night at home, we sat on the porch under the stars again. I asked her, "Do you ever wish this had all happened differently?" She thought for a long time. Then she said, "I used to." But now she looked up. If it had been different, maybe I wouldn't be who I am. She turned to me and smiled. And I like who I am. I reached over, touched her cheek. "I love who you are." She hugged me tight before she left. Not rushed, not obligatory, but like she knew exactly what she was giving and exactly what I was receiving. And when she drove away, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't emotional, but because for the first time in 30 years, my tears weren't about loss. They were about joy. And the way healing sneaks in when you least expect it. A few weeks later, I found myself at a bookstore downtown. I was wandering, aimless, half distracted, and then I saw it. On a small table by the register, Daughters Without Birthdays, Quiet Adoptions in America. A collection of essays and testimonies. Rachel's name was listed on the back cover. I bought 5 copies. Then I walked outside and sat in my car with the book in my hands and the world still spinning outside the windshield. I opened to the dedication page. For Evelyn, who never stopped searching, who never stopped being my mother even when they told her I was gone. I sat there until the sun dipped low, holding proof, not of a crime, not of a tragedy, but of a bond no one could sever, not even time. Now when people ask what happened, I tell them this: I had a daughter. They told me she died, but the DNA didn't lie, and neither did the ache in my chest that lasted 30 years. We found each other again, and then we found our voice. And that was the beginning of something bigger than both of us. Maybe justice doesn't always look like handcuffs. Maybe it's not loud or clean or cinematic. Maybe it's just 2 women standing in the truth, refusing to sit down. Maybe it's every other mother who now dares to ask questions. Maybe it's every daughter who finally finds the face she saw in her dreams. Maybe justice is when silence ends, and someone listens. So if you're still searching, if your heart tells you something never added up, don't let the world gaslight you. Don't let records define reality. You're not crazy. You're not alone. And you're not invisible anymore. My name is Evelyn Monroe. I was robbed of 30 years, but I took back the rest. Thank you for hearing my story. If it stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a truth buried too long, please share it in the comments below. I read every one. And don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because the more stories we tell, the less silence there is for them to hide in.